We want to stick with this topic because President Biden's drop in popularity posing a significant challenge for Democrats in the midterms. Our next guest, though, has some advice for the president. We want to bring in former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. Mayor, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Seana.
You recently penned an op-ed in The Atlantic. It was titled, "Joe Biden can, quote, learn from my mistakes." What's your advice for the president?
Yeah, I want to pick up on what Rick said a moment ago. You know, Seana, I think there is time to turn it around. And I think there is more sense among Democrats the need to get something done, both moderates and progressives. My advice to the president is to recognize that you can't live in the weeds, which is something I did too often. You can't just do great work behind the scenes. It's really important to show people your work and to provide a unified message. And I think that's what's lacking right now. I think he's working really hard. I think he's actually quite a good communicator. But I'll give you an example. I mean, today he talked about affordable internet. That's great. A few days ago, it was semiconductors. That's great. Before that, it was Javelin missiles for Ukraine. But what I don't see is him saying to people squarely, here's how I'll bring down your costs. And that's what I'm going to focus on because I understand you. And I think there's time to do that, particularly on healthcare costs.
So then in terms of issues that could then make or break what happens in the midterms, but obviously a lot of people are going to want the support of the president as they're running for the midterms. What do you think are going to be the make or break topics for voters?
Well, I think the president is sitting right now on top of two extraordinary issues, to his credit, where he has put forward a lot of the right ideas and can turn them into action in time. I'll say it bluntly, some people will love it, some people won't. But one thing that is extremely popular in this country across partisan lines is higher taxes on corporations and the wealthy. That's a plan the president's put forward that actually could get out of the U.S. Senate and pass. Equally, lowering prescription drug costs, something people feel very deeply. Another area where we've seen agreement from Senator Manchin, for example, and there's a possibility of getting something done. What I would say is it doesn't take everything. It doesn't take the president achieving everything overnight or on all fronts. What's necessary is some forward motion on the things that people feel viscerally. They certainly feel health costs very personally. It's a kitchen table issue. They feel the fairness issue around taxation very deeply. I think you add that together with some of the very good things the president's done, like infrastructure, and then a sharp contrast with Republicans on issues like abortion. And you're talking about a very different electoral reality 6 months from now than what we're seeing today.
Abortion may be the one unifying moment that this party has. Talking about the split, though, many focus, Mr. Mayor, on Joe Manchin, but right here in New York might be the best example of the split within the party between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and your predecessor, or the man who replaced you, Eric Adams. And the New York Times has a piece today saying they haven't talked in a year, and it characterizes it this way: Mr. Adams as an avatar of pragmatic moderatism, and AOC as an ardent left-wing warrior. Which of those two has the correct path forward for the party?
Well, I think you and I would agree pragmatic monetarism doesn't exactly roll off the tongue.
No.
So I wouldn't advise that as a slogan, But look, I think the fact is, it's a really interesting article you're referencing from today about apparently, a disconnect between the two of them. But here's what's interesting to me. There's a lot of common ground that has not yet been tapped into. For example, in both of them focus on the issues of working people, and that's where the Democratic Party excels. This would be a part of my advice to Joe Biden, again, based on my own experience, my own mistakes, is get back to that essential message of connecting with working people in their lives. Joe Biden, again, very good communicator. Eric Adams is a great communicator. So is AOC. They have common ground there. I think what the Democratic Party needs to recognize is, it's a little cheesy, but it's true. There's a lot more that unifies us than divides us. But what we haven't been smart enough about is getting a couple of key victories on the board on manageable things. That's why I point to things like prescription drugs, which really matter to people. And just a sharp, clear message about being on the side of working people, an area where Republicans historically have faltered. The Republicans are falling into another trap now, which is actually more profound than what's happening to the Democrats. The Trump endorsements, and I will tell you, I think Trump will generally win with his endorsements, but unfortunately he tends to choose rather extremist candidates. When you put that together with the Roe v. Wade situation, I think it's going to be really tough for Republicans to win the votes of a lot of working class women and suburban middle class women. So there's time to pull these pieces together. And I'd say to my colleagues here in New York, sit down and talk, because I actually think you have a lot more in common than you realize.
Mayor, when we talk about the future of the Democratic Party, when we look beyond the midterms, the focus then is going to turn to the 2024 election. Speculation about whether or not we will see a Biden-Trump rematch. I'm curious just for your take, who you hope to see or who you think the Democrats should put forward in 2024.
Well, let's acknowledge that 2022, November, is 6 months away. That's a long time. 2024 elections are way, way off. But right now, it would be Joe Biden because he has the different elements that add up to a victory. I mean, he won by 7 million votes and won states like Arizona and Georgia. That's extremely impressive. And again, I think some of it is he is a likable, relatable human being who can actually unify a lot of the party. His positions are very amenable to the progressive wing of the party on so many issues. I mentioned a few on prescription drugs, on taxation, but he also really relates well to the moderate wing of the party and to working people across all ethnicities. That's the winning formula for Democrats. So based on everything we know right now, the guy with the best chance of holding the White House in 2024 is Joe Biden, the guy who holds it right now.
And are there any voting blocks that you think the Democratic Party should perhaps focus on more or really encourage more to really get them on board with the midterm elections?
Oh, absolutely. I will tell you, I think in terms of the midterms, I'll state the obvious. Again, working class women and middle class women, I think, are going to look at this whole election differently because of what we heard last Monday night. I think that's going to be a voting issue, an emotional, intense personal issue that actually will motivate people to vote. And that means in a lot of the key swing districts in red and purple states in particular. That's one. But I also think Democrats still need to do better across all working class categories. So, you know, a lot of talk has gone into the white working class, but if you look at some of the recent polling, Democrats have to do a better job with Latino and Asian and African-American working class people. But I think it is about going back to our roots, really, with those core economic kitchen table issues. I think a lot of people are still listening. I think American voters have become more and more independent minded, if you will. They think more independently. They're less connected just to party identification. But Democrats must give more of a clear rationale to those working class voters. I think a lot of them can be won back. And particularly, I think that's true among women.
I want to ask you about what's going on here in New York. And the latest data shows 33% of workers in New York have returned to office, the lowest in the country, 10% lower than the other 10 major cities. And the highest, the polls are showing that people are actually more concerned about their safety, about crime rates, than they are actually about COVID in particular. Do you feel at all responsible for that crime and for people not feeling safe? And what's your advice to Eric Adams in solving that challenge?
Well, it can be solved and it will be solved. I have faith in Eric Adams, and I'll tell you why I'm so confident, because in the months even before the pandemic, just over 2 years ago, we had the lowest crime rates we had had since the 1950s. New York City was unquestionably the safest big city in America as recently as 2 years and a few months ago. So we know it can be done. We've gone through a very profound disruption. We were the epicenter of this crisis with COVID. There's been tremendous pain and dislocation. On top of that, remember, when you talk about people coming back to the office here, it's against that backdrop of so much fear still about what COVID did, so much that people experience that is different from so many other cities. This is a city where people commute on mass transit more than any other city in the country. And if they see some incidents in our subway, for example, of course, that's going to give a lot of people pause. But I think this is about being really persistent. The NYPD is the finest police force in the country, 35,000 officers strong. They will turn this situation. We got to do more to bring the communities and the police together. That's an area where there's still work to be done because of the rift caused very painfully during COVID and after the murder of George Floyd, and that doesn't heal overnight. So I am convinced that the tide will be turned, and I think it will happen in the course of this year. I don't think it'll be the next few months, but I think it will be during 2022. And what ultimately happens in New York City historically is the resiliency wins the day. People will come back. They will show faith in this city. You've seen incredible investments from the tech sector and the life sciences sector in just the last year. You've seen real estate prices booming. These are not accidental indicators. There actually is a lot of confidence, but it's going to take some more results on the ground to turn the corner.
Mayor, we want to ask you about a headline that's been getting some attention here in recent weeks. New York City Councilwoman Joanne Ariola saying that she wants your pension to be docked until the $320,000 spent on what she characterizes as misusing your security detail while in office until that is repaid. I'm curious, just what is your response to what she's calling for, the fact that she wants your pension to be docked?
Well, look, I think the bottom line here is if we believe in a fair system where you really try to get to the truth of the best way of doing things, then you should believe it's important that I raised very serious issues about the ruling she's addressing, issues that I think were problematic in terms of security for mayors and their families going forward, in terms of legal precedent, a number of issues that are still being considered by the appropriate authorities. And we need that process to be resolved. And that would be true with any issue. When someone offers an appeal and says, wait, I think there's more here that needs to be considered, that needs to be respected. When all is said and done, of course, I'm going to follow the law and want to always do things appropriately. But I think I haven't heard the details, but I think the council member is leaving a big piece of this puzzle out of the discussion.
All right, well, we'll see if we can get her response as well. Thank you, former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. Appreciate it, sir. Thanks.